Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. Today's show is all about a new film from A24 called Sing Sing. The film takes place inside that famed, feared prison and follows a group of incarcerated men taking part in a theatre programme entitled Rehabilitation Through the Arts. John Divine G. Whitfield helps steer the group as they begin to choose and rehearse a new performance, which turns out to be a chaotic, time-travelling fantasy comedy. Played by Colman Domingo, Divine G is a thoughtful, artistic type who wants his fellow thespians to reap the rewards of having a creative outlet during their time inside. But he's also fighting for parole and the chance of a new life and physical freedom on the other side of the walls of Sing Sing. Domingo is joined in the cast by alumni from the programme itself, the shining star of which is undoubtedly Clarence Divine Eye Macklin, who plays a younger version of himself. Divine Eye is at the beginning of his involvement with the theatre programme, an intimidating and forceful presence in the exercise yard, who's also an exacting actor who delivers Shakespearean soliloquies with quiet aplomb. I was delighted to speak with Sing Sing's director, Greg Kwedar, to find out more about the film and about both what takes place on the screen and the conversations and events that took place behind the scenes, which proved to be fascinating. First, to give you a sense of the film, let's hear some of the trailer.
This is a clemency hearing for your conviction, 25 to life. Since you've been in custody, you've been involved in a theater program.
Gentlemen, let's go.
It's been a program that was established to help people get more in touch with their feelings and truly get some rehabilitation.
I am Gladiator Goliath. I am Spartacus.
I'm Prince Hamlet of Denmark.
And it's turned into something of, wonderful.
What part do you play?
From time to time I do act, like we all do.
So are you acting at all during this interview?
A little taste of Sing Sing there, and here in the studio, I began by asking Greg when he first heard about some of the success stories which came out of the Rehabilitation Through the Arts programme.
I came across this story quite unexpectedly over 8 years ago. I was producing a short documentary inside of a maximum security prison in Kansas, and it was my first time ever behind the walls. Mm-hmm. We were doing a film about something else, but on a tour of the facility, I passed by a cell, and there was a young man raising a rescue dog inside of his cell, and it just stopped me in my tracks. I think first and foremost because it completely upended all of my expectations of prison and incarcerated people, largely built on the movies that I grew up watching. Yeah. But yet inside of the cell was something that was going completely against that current. Mm-hmm. And what I was witnessing was healing that was happening in both directions between this man and this animal. And so I was, I felt like the compassion there. And I was also frustrated at the same time, because my own industry had sort of propped up a lot of things that sort of was painting a different picture. Mm-hmm. And so that night in the hotel room, I was just very desperate to know, was there anyone else out there doing things differently? And I typed that literally into Google, who is doing things differently in prison? And near the top of the search field was this program.
It's refreshingly honest.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Every once in a while, and this is, I'm not sponsored by Google in any way, but near the top of the search field was this program in New York, Rehabilitation Through the Arts, RTA. And they had been around since 1996 at Sing Sing. They had been putting on plays there ever since. They had done all the classics. They'd been covering a lot of the major press. But there was this article in Esquire from 2005 production of a time-traveling musical comedy called Breaking the Mummy's Code that just grabbed me.
And this, by the way, is the production that
it's in the movie.
That the inmates put on in the film.
Yeah.
And it's an odd choice, where they start off with a bit of Midsummer Night's Dream, maybe a bit of King Lear, whatever it might be, right. And they do this mashup thing, which is very powerful in the end.
And there was just this desire to shake things up, and the way one of our characters in the film, Clarence Divine Eye Macklin, says is like, every day we're dealing with trauma, drama. Every day there's tragedy. And he was just like, I think population just might appreciate a comedy, and then that unlocks this sort of feeling in the room where everyone starts just throwing stuff at the wall of like, I want a little bit of Freddy Krueger, and I want a little bit of Sherwood Forest, and like maybe Peter Pan and this and that, and pirates. And so Brent took that and he wrote all of that into one play. And the only way to get through it was time travel to cover all that ground.
Yeah, and there's obviously there's that crazy breadth and depth that this play covers, and then there's obviously the huge journeys, time travel or otherwise. And I thought time travel was an interesting idea because it's what perhaps a lot of people in prison would like to be able to do to turn back the clock. There's always that kind of notion, a little bit like a swinging pendulum in this film as well, isn't there?
And within that, I think people experience time incarcerated in very unique ways, and most specifically, there is slow time and there is fast time. Slow time is feels like it's just melting forward, and a lot of men, kind of, break the battery in their watch so that they don't have to look at the seconds going by, And then there's fast time. And that's the time that you could actually wish you could slow down. And I think the only time probably incarcerated you experience that is when you have access to something as liberating as the artistic process of putting these shows on. And for 6 months, you get to hurtle through with your friends to kind of conjure up these imaginary places and stories, and those walls kind of melt away. And then at the end of those 6 months, you put that show on, and backstage you're counted once again, you're putting these greens back on, and you go back to your cell, and the slow time begins again until you start getting a new production on its feet.
And you address that beautifully in the film. There are moments in the cells when the men are on their own and they're having their own thoughts, or maybe they're having one-on-one conversations, and that feels like slow time, but it feels like it's very tender. And then there is obviously the rush and excitement, and there's obviously a little bit of the competitiveness and the kind of trying to unearth or trying to bring people into the circle. And you get amazing performances out of people as amazing as Colman Domingo, clearly, but also from people that are not actors, who have been incarcerated. Principally, and this is the kind of sort of duality at the centre of the film, is, as you say, Clarence Macklin, who's Divine I, and he kind of plays opposite Divine G, and this is Colman Domingo's character, whose real name is John Whitfield, who's a scholarly dude and all the rest of it. And so they kind of have a clash of egos and maybe a clash of personalities. What was it like on set when those two men met each other and started working together under your direction, I wonder, Greg?
Well, the interesting thing within this project is this alchemy that's happening from established actors like Coleman, who is really at the height of his powers, coming into a space with men with real lived experience who actually, have quite a lot of training, through this program on the stage. Yeah. It just happens to be in the exact setting that the movie exists within, and so they're also able to bring that quality to it of what this really felt like, as well as all the gifts that the program offered in terms of like this true, almost miraculous vulnerability that has come through their own personal evolution, and they're bringing that to the picture as well. And you also mentioned something about tenderness kind of as you were building up to the question, and that is something that was very important to the cast in these performances, most notably by Coleman. As he was engaging with this project, one of the early conversations I had with him is like, I want my performance to stand on 3 pillars. I want it to be honest, I want it to be elegant, and I want it to be tender. And what I didn't realize was that became kind of like a lens by which to view almost the entire process of making the film. And when Coleman and Clarence met, they first met on a Zoom actually in development as we were still working on the script. And we were sort of writing this new version of the script and rehearsing it in tandem, and they would hop on Zoom and they would read these scenes. We would break them down and we would talk about what we would write next. And so we were rehearsing and writing like back and forth. But when they first met, the chemistry was there, right, from the beginning.
Chemistry in both ways, maybe. There is a little bit of a pugilistic thing about it as much as there is a tenderness to it.
Well, in a story at its core about a friendship, I think what's special about it is that these are 2 characters in the story as well as in life, who probably wouldn't have been friends outside of this circumstance. They couldn't have been more different from each other or come from very different backgrounds, but found a unifying force through the process and realizing how they fit together in the most unlikely ways, and through this journey become almost closer than family. And I was watching that sort of unfold with one of the men who was actually playing a version of himself, and then another man who's sort of channeling the spirit of that actual guy bloom into their own special friendships in real time. It was really a marvel. It's
amazing, and their chemistry is palpable. I mean, it jumps off the screen. It's a delight to behold, and it's also scary in parts as well. I mean, perhaps necessarily. I don't mean just the threats of violence. I mean that the unlocking of a key into a deeper part of yourself is obviously lead to all sorts of things and conversations. Also, it seems like you've made a drama about drama, and these men are acting. They're pretending to be actors, and they are actors as well. There's a very interesting thing there, no more so than Divine Eye, Clarence's character, who wants to be the Prince of Denmark. He wants to be Hamlet, and he soliloquizes. And he's obviously also a man who is on an existential mission himself, like that character. Did he suggest that? Did you suggest that? Was that workshopped? Because it's obviously so perfect. That reading of those lines is amazing, right?
Well, he actually played Hamlet and delivered that soliloquy in 2005 in the original staging of Mummy's Code. And so he was the resident Shakespearean of the group, and for whatever reason, he really connected to the voice of that writing, at a very critical moment in his life where, he was one of the most feared men of Sing Sing and was someone who got respect that way and used it in many ways as a survival mechanism. And yet, as he came into this work, one of the sonnets were one of the first things that he had access to in a Shakespeare workshop in the program, and there was something about the music of that, the rhythm that was starting to, like a little hammer, start to knock at this sort of veneer, and then penetrate into a deeper place where he found that the pen truly was mightier than the sword.
Yeah, his journey, for want of a better word, is very profound in this film. It's really wonderful. And then Divine G's character also has this journey. He is looking to get out, and he has it seems like through his time, he's had various parole hearings. And there's a fantastic scene, and this is about the truth and reality of acting, and whether it's it's a super truth, whether it can deliver a super truth. And that is how well you should act in your parole hearing before the governors or whoever that is. That's an amazing thing. Was that workshopped, or was that part of the thing? Because that's an amazing thing. How well should you do it in order to be believable, in order to get out, right?
Well, that's very interesting scene and how it came together, because when we were writing that, I had come across a parole transcript in the New York Times, and I just remember reading this record of this hearing and being so riveted, because on one side of the table you have these commissioners who are doing maybe their 12th case of the day and sort of very casually going through these proceedings, and on the other side of that table there's someone literally fighting for their life. And I remember calling Divine G afterwards and saying, I have this idea for your clemency hearing. I read this transcript in the New York Times. What if we took a bunch of transcripts and cobbled together this scene and be real questions that were actually asked of people? And he was like, wow, that's really interesting. Or you could just use my transcript. Yeah. And so that's powerful stuff. He was actually asked in that hearing, are you acting in this interview? And in the transcript, you see him start to grapple with that and almost sort of fall apart. And I remember on the day when we were shooting that with Coleman, initially when he was asked that question, Coleman's response as an actor was to fight back, and to really sort of say, no, of course, there's something bigger here happening, and I'm being sincere. And after that first take, I remember talking to him, and I was like, when you're asked that question, it's over. There's no coming back from that. He's like, oh, that's a nice note. Thank you. But then when he started rolling, he gets asked a question. You see his face fall, and all manner of tragedy and anger and every emotion in the color wheel play across that until there's a resignation in a way. And I'm just like, wow, to be a witness to something that profound, to be in the room for that was a gift.
Yeah, it must have been wonderful. And it seems that way on screen. People have to do a lot of work with their faces in this film as well, right? There's the physicality of on-stage theatre, but you've made a feature film, obviously. I wondered how the men reacted to that, because there is something about being on a stage and having an audience who are sitting 30 feet away, seeing you do your thing, to having a camera in your face. And there are some issues about personal space in this film, obviously, because of the lack of personal space that these men have. What about that? How did you have to go in softly with your camera, with your crew, with the apparatus of filmmaking?
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to how aligned the entire community of artists that engaged in this project was, and the sensitivity that went through it. Our cinematographer, Pat Scola, is a very intuitive storyteller himself, and the evolution of the camera across the making of the film is like in the more traditional prison environments, we tried to have the camera be almost as confined as the men were, very locked off, very formal photography. But as we moved into the program, to allow it to bloom and to interact and to almost dance with the same freedom that the men had, and within that start to draw closer. Because I think that's maybe the most radical aspect of this movie is sort of forcing an audience to really look these men in the eyes and to hear their stories, because once you do that, they can't be anything but human, and also I was very nervous, making a film in such a confined environment. Would you be able to achieve scale and scope when the whole set is enclosed in walls? And a big revelation that we had as we were getting ready to shoot is like, oh, this is a movie about the landscape of the human face, about the million stories that it tells, and about this rich mosaic of people sort of stitched together in the fabric of one community.
Well, it's amazing. You also, as you've mentioned, a lot of your talent in the film are non-professional actors. They're playing themselves. And also, how do you start negotiating that? What version of themselves did you ask them for? Did they want to offer? There's a funny point in The Pendulum again there, isn't there? Where they're, yeah. And so where did you arrive at?
Well, even within the script, there's sort of these three pillars. The friendship between Divine I and Divine G was quite scripted and was the spine. But then the production of Mummy's Code, we started to loosen our grip on that, and we would plot dialogue or structural moments throughout that were relevant to the overall arc. But we tried to allow the kind of natural chaos of the process to kind of come into it. And then there were truly unscripted moments in this movie, such as there's a moment that we call Perfect Place, where the men are in a circle and Brent, the theater teacher, asks the men to close their eyes and imagine their most perfect spot.
It's a great scene.
And the only thing scripted in that scene was the prompt of the exercise. And as these men open their eyes again, they speak completely from their own experience and from their own stories of where that perfect place was for them. And so there was often space and opportunity of, creating this platform to allow for people to willingly come in and offer from their own journey. But the dance is to never make that feel like it's pressure to do that, And I think that's largely due to, all the work that preceded us in this program. We were sort of standing on the shoulders of everything that they had already built.
And what about the reality of filming in, I think it was, you shot in former incarceration facilities in various states, perhaps. But what was it like for these men to go back? You must have needed some professional shoulders to cry on, as it were, as much as just to make a nice, have a good vibe on set, I think.
Yeah, we shot the whole thing in New York. We shot 4 locations to make our one Sing Sing. The real Sing Sing, all the exteriors of the facility is the real place, which is one of the most iconic prisons in America, if not the world. And then all of the interiors was at a place called Downstate Correctional Facility that was actually closed a month before we went in there. And what was unique about this place, it was a maximum security facility that the entirety of our alumni cast had been incarcerated at one point in their journeys. And so, yes, it was something we were all very sensitive about. We never wanted to be re-traumatized. And we did have a therapist on set who had worked with these men when they were at Sing Sing. And so there was a trust there. But what we didn't expect was this sort of personal transition that started to happen in the mindset of the men as they worked through this project. One, having this realization that the purpose of what they were doing was greater than any discomfort, but also the actual physical space that once held them in captivity, now they were able to move freely through. And the greens that they once wore as a mandate now became a costume by which to express a character, and there was a liberation within that. And even it was like Clarence Divine I. Macklin, the cell that he occupies in the movie was built by our production designer Ruta specifically to his instructions and from his memories. And it was directly beneath a cell he once occupied that was there.
The film is a very kind of psychologically interesting thing about the making of the film. Yeah. There's a great documentary to be made one day, I'm sure, about the making of this thing. It's absolutely fascinating. How does that feel to you, walking in and the sort of the import and the moment of these walls, the kind of hearts that have been broken within these walls? I wonder what does that feel like? Is there a sort of heaviness, or do you have to lean into that if it exists, or do you try to push against it to make a film within these confines?
It's palpable. I mean, you can't go in there, even a decommissioned facility, and it not leave some kind of mark on you. One, just psychologically, that much razor wire around the facility, out every window, creates a sensation almost like the razor wire is choking you out. And then also, most prisons in America don't have heating and air conditioning or much ventilation. And so we were there in the summer, and the way heat just sits on you like a weight. It's also a labyrinth and kind of a maze and designed that way. You'll go down one set of stairs to go up another go down another, and then you're entirely lost and turned around. And then, as you were saying, like, you feel the ghosts in the walls. And it's a very hard thing to shake. And yet, we could create art here. I think the universality of this story, as it transcends beyond its setting, is that, if here these men could choose each other, choose joy, choose love in a place that's designed to grind that out, then surely it should exist elsewhere. It can exist for us too.
Yeah, we should say also, we're obviously talking about some of the serious aspects of this, and it's a serious subject, but there's moments of amazing transcendence, joy, and great humour. And this offers no spoiler to our listeners, but because it's in the trailer.
A time-traveling musical comedy. That's still there.
yeah, it's obviously nuts as well in lots of ways, happily nuts. But there's this wonderful moment where they're in the exercise yard. There's a moment where Divine G and Divine I, Clarence Macklin and Colman Domingo, are in the exercise yard, and a moment of reckoning has happened a couple of scenes before, and he goes, "Man, I murdered that Shakespeare lane," or whatever. He means he's absolutely knocks it out of the park, right? This soliloquy or whatever from Hamlet.
Murdered that Hamlet to me, bro. Shakespeare is in his grave right now. He rolled over.
You did your thing, beloved.
There's many brilliant moments like this as well. I mean, there's a huge amount of heart and tenderness in this thing. I just want to ask you one last question, because we've talked about Coleman, we've talked about Clarence, and everyone that appears in this film is wonderful. None more so than Paul Racy, who plays Brett Buell, who's kind of you on set, right? He's the facilitator. He's the I guess the coordinator and director of the stage plays. He's brilliant. What was that like, talking to him to kind of get? Did he just? It feels like he'd done something similar to that before. I mean,
well, he had a really interesting background. He was a Vietnam vet who had come home like very angry, and came across a theater teacher that helped him find a pathway and access to those emotions. He's also a coda, so he's a child of deaf adults, and kind of came up in deaf theater, and then became an advocate within the court and prison systems to interpret for incarcerated people who were deaf. and to help them be able to...
A lot of empathy and a lot of...
Yeah, without question.
Yeah.
And so, this warmth kind of just emanates from him, and he's got this face that is just very clear that he's lived some life himself. And he also had the real Brent Beale there every day, and they just found this wonderful, long conversation back and forth of, what did it really feel like? And then he could observe Brent working with the alums that he once taught, and it was just a constant feedback sort of that helped him develop an honest way of portraying that character.
It's just yet another sublime kind of performance in this film. It all seems very effortless, and it is. I guess there is that thing we're watching a film about a piece of drama being enacted, both on and off stage, as it were, I suppose. And it must be. Is it difficult to do that? Do you have to seeing the edges of? How do you know where to put the edges of the frame almost when you're doing a drama about drama?
Yeah, it was a very hard.
It get quite so existential.
Very hard movie to explain to anybody. Yeah. When we were trying, much less the cast that was coming on. Of you're going to play yourself, but kind of a version of yourself. This was a play you once did, back in 2005, 20 years ago. That we're going to remount. And then there's stage moments, there's fiction moments, there's unscripted moments, and time travel, and, somehow it's all going to work together. But, there was this enthusiasm for everyone involved of just all right, well, let's just get it on its feet. We'll see what we find.
Brilliant. Well, congratulations on Sing Sing, Greg. It's absolutely brilliant. And thank you very much for your time.
Oh, my gosh. So great to be here. Thank you so much.
And that is all for this week. My thanks to Greg Kwedar, and Sing Sing is in cinemas from the 30th of August. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bounds, thanks for tuning in.